at 11:50-7 p.m. On the night of August 20-1st, 1940-2, deep in the jungles of Guadalcanal, a battle was brewing. This battle would change the course of the Pacific War. Captain John Haytottle crouched behind a muddy ridge, his palms sweating cold. His eyes fixed on dark shadows moving through the jungle mist 200 yards away. The humid air was thick with the scent of rotting vegetation. The whispers of distant Japanese troops, a spine-chilling sound that heralded death's approach. Mist rose from the rain-soaked ground, swirling around the gun. The 30-7 anti-tank gun he commanded, like an ominous omen. 30-1-year-old Haytottle was a Marine Corps artillery officer. At this moment he was about to make a decision that defied all military doctrine. A decision that would save countless American lives in the months to come. For months, he had been refining a weapon never intended for anti-tank personnel use. A weapon originally designed to penetrate tank armor. But tonight, it would reveal terrifying new capabilities. Sergeant Eddie McCullough, the gunner, performed a final check on the breech. He loaded a seemingly ordinary shell. However, hidden inside was a lethal device the Japanese had never encountered before. 120 to marble-sized steel balls, packed tightly together, ready to pour out like hellfire. For months, the Japanese Banzai charge had struck terror. It struck terror into American forces across the Pacific. Screaming soldiers formed human waves, charging with fixed bayonets, using numerical superiority and fanatical courage to overwhelm their enemies, their eyes burning with the fanaticism of sacrificing for the emperor. As if death was not an end but the beginning of glory. Every Marine on Guadalcanal had heard the chilling rumors. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers charging simultaneously, unstoppable, willing to die for the emperor, dragging battles into the nightmare of bayonet combat, rendering American firepower useless. This tactic had worked repeatedly from the battlefields of China to the Philippines, breaking enemy lines with brutal simplicity, destroying morale, making countless enemies tremble with fear. The Japanese first used the Banzai charge on a large scale. On the Chinese battlefield, where Chinese forces lacked efficient automatic firepower and heavy weapons, almost helpless against this crazy human wave tactic. Japanese commanders thus formed a mistaken belief spiritual power could overcome material advantages. Fanatical charges could break through any defense. This belief seemed validated in the early stages of the Pacific War. The American defeat in the Philippines made the Japanese even more convinced. They believed their tactics were invincible. That night, more than 1,000 of the Japanese 17th Infantry Division were preparing. They firmly believed that traditional tactics would drive the Americans back into the sea, just as they had done on other battlefields. However, Haytottle's gun was loaded not with armor-piercing shells as designed, but with M- canister shells, transforming this tank killer. When the first Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle, bayonets glinting in the moonlight, war cries tearing through the night sky. That suffocating terror filled the entire position. Haytottle held his breath, waiting for them to enter optimal range. 100 yards, 80 yards, 60 yards. Fire. The cannon roared, recoil shaking the entire position. The shell burst 40 yards from the muzzle, releasing a lethal cloud of steel balls, spreading forward at 1,400 feet per second. This instant changed the course of the Pacific War. Steel balls tore through human bodies, the battlefield instantly becoming a slaughterhouse. Charging Japanese soldiers fell in rows like wheat cut by an invisible scythe, their war cries turning into screams, their fanaticism turning into terror. Those fortunate enough to survive unscathed discovered in horror that their proud Banzai charges meant nothing against American industrial power. This was not combat, this was massacre, technology crushing spirit, industry defeating fanaticism. Within minutes, more than 300 Japanese soldiers lay dead. A casualty rate exceeding 80%. Survivors retreated in panic, and the myth of the Banzai charge was thoroughly shattered that night. After the battle, the battlefield was filled with a nauseating smell of blood. American soldiers carefully walked out of their positions. The sight before them unforgettable piles of corpses stacked like mountains, many bodies riddled with thousands of holes from steel balls, almost unrecognizable. Those once fanatical soldiers had now become cold corpses, their faces still retaining expressions of fear and confusion, as if asking, why didn't our courage overcome? Why didn't the Emperor protect us? Captain Haytotte's innovation was born of desperation. In the early stages of the Guadalcanal campaign, American forces faced severe shortages. The Japanese, relying on jungle warfare experience and fanatical fighting spirit, repeatedly broke through American lines, making American soldiers afraid to sleep at night. Traditional machine gun and rifle fire struggled to stop dense human wave charges, while heavy artillery could not be rapidly deployed in jungle terrain. Haytottle noticed that Japanese charges always came in dense formations, which gave him an idea. He began studying the ammunition types for the 30-7mm gun. He discovered the existence of canister shot. This ammunition was originally designed for use against light armored vehicles and soft targets. But no one thought to use it against infantry. In fact, canister shot is an ancient type of ammunition that can be traced back to the grape shot of the Napoleonic era, but was gradually forgotten after World War I. Haytottle accidentally discovered the existence of this ammunition while flipping through old military manuals. He immediately realized its potential. The canister shot works like a giant shotgun, with a shell packed with numerous steel balls that burst at a specific distance, releasing a dense rain of pellets. Each steel ball is about 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and while a single one might not be lethal. When 120- steel balls hit a human body simultaneously, the effect is like being stabbed by dozens of bayonets at once. Haytottle calculated that if the burst distance was set between 60 and 80 yards, the steel ball cloud would cover a fan-shaped area up to 50 yards wide, enough to destroy any charging infantry formation. This calculation was based on complex ballistics principles, and Haytottle spent 3 whole nights calculating, using up an entire notebook. Together with Gunner McCull, Low and Sergeant Miller, he conducted multiple tests in the rear, adjusting powder loads and timing mechanisms. Finally finding the optimal configuration, after each test, they carefully checked the steel ball dispersion pattern, measured coverage area, and recorded lethal effects. This data later became standard teaching material for American artillery training. After each test, they carefully recorded the dispersion range and density. The battle on the night of August 20- first proved the astonishing effectiveness of this tactic. Lieutenant General Hiroki Hayakutake had planned to break through. He planned to break through American lines through this massive charge and recapture Henderson Field. He assembled 1,200 elite soldiers equipped with ample ammunition. Confidently believing that American firepower could not stop the fanatical Japanese charge, at the pre-attack mobilization meeting, Hayakutake stood before the soldiers. He passionately declared, "Tonight, we will use our courage and determination to drive the Americans back into the sea. His Majesty the Emperor will protect us." However, he underestimated American innovation and the decisive impact of industrial power on warfare. When the charge began, Japanese soldiers shouted. They shouted, "Long live His Majesty the Emperor," charging toward American positions with fixed bayonets. Their courage was unquestionable, but courage could not stop steel balls. Haytotte's 3 30-7mm guns fired simultaneously, creating a crossfire network. The first volley alone struck down more than 150 charging soldiers. The second volley followed immediately, causing similar casualties. Within 5 minutes, the charge was completely broken. Surviving Japanese soldiers retreated in terror, many even discarding their weapons, their eyes filled with fear of this unknown weapon. The casualty ratio of this battle was shocking. The Japanese committed 1,200 men and suffered over 900 casualties, including more than 600 killed. On the American side, only 3 were lightly wounded, with no fatalities. Such a lopsided casualty ratio was unprecedented in the Pacific War. He described the tactical application of canister shot and recommended it as standard doctrine against Japanese Banzai charges. The report quickly drew high-level attention, and Marine Corps Headquarters released a new training manual in October, specifically adding a chapter on canister shot. Including detailed fire configuration diagrams and optimal firing distances, artillery schools began incorporating anti-mine personnel firing into their training curricula, teaching gunners to calculate projectile dispersion patterns and select ammunition types. This report not only changed American tactics, but affected the entire Pacific War. On the Japanese side, Lieutenant General Haytottle fell into deep frustration after the defeat. His tactics had worked repeatedly in China and Southeast Asia, yet met with disastrous failure on Guadalcanal. Japanese intelligence could not understand what weapon the Americans had used to cause such massive casualties. Survivors' descriptions were confusing. They spoke of steel storms and invisible killers, but no one could accurately describe the nature of this weapon. This confusion lasted for weeks, until Japanese intelligence officers learned of canister shot from captured American soldiers. However, even knowing the truth, the Japanese could not find effective countermeasures. Their tactical system was built on spiritual power and numerical superiority. Unable to cope with this technical slaughter, the victory at Guadalcanal was only the beginning. In subsequent battles at Tarawa and Saipan, canister shot continued to deliver. Japanese soldiers began to fear Banzai charges, and those who had heard of the Guadalcanal became increasingly reluctant to participate in such suicidal attacks. American intelligence reports showed that starting in early 1940-3, the frequency and intensity of Japanese human wave attacks declined significantly. Enemy commanders increasingly relied on defensive tactics, avoiding exposing large numbers of troops to concentrated American fire. They began to question, why didn't the Emperor protect us? Why didn't our courage overcome the enemy's weapons? This questioning spread through Japanese units, seriously affecting morale. Many soldiers began to fear participating in Banzai charges, preferring other tactics rather than facing that terrible weapon. Captain Haytottle received the Silver Star for his innovative tactics at Guadalcanal. However, this medal seemed insufficient to recognize his tactical innovation. After the war, Haytottle never publicly discussed his role in the development of canister shot tactics, accepting a teaching position at the Marine Corps Artillery School. Spending the remainder of his military career teaching a new generation of gunners the lessons of jungle warfare, Sergeant McCullough returned to his home in Michigan. He could never forget those experiences, hearing the wet, tearing sound of steel balls striking human bodies, a sound that continued to haunt his nightmares decades later. Waking him up covered in cold sweat, McCullough worked as a mechanic in Detroit's automotive industry, applying the precision manufacturing skills learned in the military. But he never mentioned to his family the power of the weapons he operated in the Pacific, because those memories were too heavy, too cruel. Occasionally, when his grandson asked about his wartime experiences, he just silently shook his head and changed the subject. He knew that some truths should not be known to future generations because they were too cruel, too heavy. Those images of steel balls tearing human bodies, those memories of battlefield horrors, were buried deep in his heart, never mentioned to anyone. War Japanese military historians acknowledged. Colonel Masood Akokikai, who survived the war and wrote extensively on Japanese military failures, viewed the encounter with canister fire on Guadalcanal. The psychological impact of this weapon on Japanese soldiers was as severe as the casualties. Entire units lost confidence that they could capture American positions. They began to question, why didn't the Emperor protect us? Why didn't our courage overcome the enemy's weapons? This questioning spread through Japanese units, seriously affecting morale. The combat performance of the 30-7mm M-3 anti-tank gun far exceeded its original design specifications. By the end of the war, total production reached 4,800 units, and American arsenals had manufactured over 2 million canister shells. The versatility of this weapon in both anti-tank and anti-personnel roles made it indispensable equipment for Marines and Army units fighting in terrain. It represents the triumph of industrial innovation and tactical flexibility over the traditional military virtues of courage and spiritual determination. This weapon, originally designed as a tank killer, ultimately evolved into one of the most effective anti-personnel systems of World War II, proving that creativity and adaptability can significantly enhance the effectiveness of existing military equipment without the need for massive investment, but by the ability to transform defensive needs into offensive advantages through the full application of American industrial strength and tactical wisdom. Captain Haytottle's innovation was but a microcosm of American military tactical adaptability during the Pacific War, using flamethrower to attack fortified positions and more. The willingness of American commanders to experiment with new technologies gave them a significant advantage over an enemy bound by a rigid tactical system. In March 1940-5, Captain Haytottle returned to San Diego, carrying with him a Silver Star earned for his innovative use of anti-tank weapons against Japanese infantry on Guadalcanal. Yet Haytottle never spoke publicly about his role in the development of canister tactics, accepting a teaching position at the Marine Corps Artillery School, spending the remainder of his military career teaching the lessons of 3 years of jungle warfare to a new generation of gunners. The success story of the gun, with the National Guard using them for training to teach a new generation of artillerymen the basics of direct fire, weapons that had been fully validated in actual combat. Many guns were transferred to Allies through military aid programs, performing excellently in the Korean War. These weapons proved their value again on the Korean battlefield when the Chinese People's Volunteers launched human wave attacks. Canister shot once again demonstrated. Museums across the United States house examples of the M-3 anti-tank gun and canister shells, but few visitors understand the significance of this weapon, capable of firing practice rounds to show the public how the canister system works, though safety regulations prohibit the use of real steel balls. They primarily focus on its anti-tank capability rather than its devastating effectiveness against personnel. Manufacturing records preserved at Rock Island Arsenal detail the precision craftsmanship required to produce effective canister shells. Quality control required the tolerance of each steel ball to be measured, reflecting the massive investment in American military manufacturing capabilities and the industrial advantage it held over Japanese war production. By 1940-4, American factories were producing canister shot faster than combat units could consume it, creating strategic reserves, ensuring American units would never lack this critical ammunition. The psychological impact of canister weapons far exceeded their immediate tactical effects, influencing Japanese strategic planning throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. Intelligence reports captured after the Japanese surrender showed, however, due to declining industrial capacity and increasingly sophisticated American defensive systems, these countermeasures weren't ever realized. Lieutenant General Haytottle was arrested for war crimes and died in 1940-7 while awaiting trial in Japanese custody, because intelligence had failed to identify the new weapons equipped by the Americans. Haytottle blamed Japanese military culture for overemphasizing spiritual factors, believing that an objective assessment of enemy strength might have avoided the disasters his troops encountered. The tactical lessons from the application. The U.S. military developed similar anti-personnel weapons including anti-minus personnel ammunition for larger caliber artillery, while the 105mm howitzer canister held 350 pellets, specifically designed to strike massed infantry formations. These weapons proved their effectiveness during the Korean War and the Vietnam War, conflicts where the U.S. once again encountered enemy tactics. Emphasizing close-quarters human wave assaults, Private Miller completed his military service in April 1940-6, having participated in 5 amphibious operations. His loading speed and reliability under fire earned him commendations from 3 battery commanders, although Miller considered his role insignificant. He used the G.I. Bill to attend a university in Ohio, becoming a high school mathematics teacher. He occasionally mentioned his military career, but never described the specific nature of his combat missions. He knew that some things were best buried in his heart forever because they were too heavy, too cruel, unsuitable to share with family. Those memories of war, those images of steel balls tearing human bodies, became his eternal secret until the day he died. The wet, tearing sound of steel balls striking human bodies, that sound continued to haunt the nightmares of survivors decades after the war ended. This sound represented the cruelest truth of the Pacific War. Courage and fanaticism could not stop industrial power and tactical innovation. The myth of the Banzai charge was shattered in the storm of steel balls, and the Pacific War was forever changed. That night was not only a victory in battle, but a collision of 2 war philosophies, one believing that spiritual power could overcome everything, the other believing that technology and innovation were the keys. History has proven that when fanaticism meets reason, when spirit meets technology, the outcome is never in doubt. The battle of that night forever changed the face of the Pacific War and forever changed the history of human warfare. The night of August 20-1st, 1940-2 marked a turning point, not just in a single battle, but in the entire philosophy of infantry warfare. Captain Haytottle's innovation demonstrated that victory in modern warfare belonged not to the most fanatical, but to the most adaptable. The 120- to steel balls that tore through the night air on Guadalcanal carried with them the weight of industrial civilization, announcing the arrival of a new era in warfare where the ability to innovate and adapt would prove more valuable than any amount of spiritual determination. The survivors of that night carried their memories in silence. Understanding that some truths were too heavy for words, the battlefield fell silent as the last echoes of the charge faded into the jungle, leaving only the questions that would never be answered. Why had the Emperor not protected his faithful soldiers? Why had courage proven insufficient? Why had courage proven insufficient against the cold mathematics of industrial warfare? These questions would echo through the decades, asked by historians and survivors alike, never fully understood. The canister shot that changed the Pacific War remains a testament to the power of tactical innovation, a reminder that victory often belongs to those who can see new possibilities in existing tools, those who can adapt doctrine to meet unexpected challenges, those who can transform desperation into innovation. The legacy of that night endures. In the annals of military history, few innovations have had such immediate and decisive impact. The 120- to steel balls changed everything. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe. I'm your strategy observer. I'll see you on the next battlefield.